the virtual reality reconstructions, where we explore the latest advancements in technology and bridging the gap between science, innovation, and justice. Today, we are honored to have Russell Boynton, a seasoned expert in crash reconstruction, forensic documentation, and 3D laser scanning, with a distinguished career spanning over 4 decades. From the services of the U.S. Marine Corps military police to his tenure as a police officer in the Northeast, Russell is dedicated to his expertise to revolutionize forensic investigations. As a senior field application engineer with FARO Technologies, he trains and supports law enforcement professionals across the U.S. in using 3D laser scanning technology to document crime, crash, and fire scenes. With extensive courtroom experience as an expert, witnesses, and have a passion for forensic education, Russ brings unparalleled insight into the evolving world of crash reconstruction. Russ, welcome to the show, first of all.
Thank you, Ryan.
Great to have you. In part 1, Russell Boynton and I discussed his background, the various software available for 3D scanning, and error rates. We then briefly covered the accuracy of 3D scanning. In part 2, we start with a more in-depth discussion about accuracy. Let's get into part 2 of 3D laser scanning and crash reconstruction with Russ.
There is over the course of taking multiple scans and then aligning, called registration, aligning those scans, there would result some sort of a project error rate or a mean error rate across your entire project. If scanning's done correctly, and typically it's very common, it's common, that is, to see error rates of less than like 0.2 of an inch or even 1/10 of an inch across multiple scans over a very large project. It's largely dependent on how well the operator scans. So we're looking at mean error rates of 0.2, maybe at most 0.3 of an inch. And that, by the way, is one of the requirements under any Daubert or Fry standard, is that you must have a known error rate for your work. And I, as a private consultant, call that out often on cases where I'm looking at the work from someone else on the other side of the case. What is your known error rate? I believe that the national standard is plus or minus 1/4 of an inch, at least in the crime scene world. And we know, crash reconstructionists know, that most of the time we can have an error rate that's larger than that. It really comes down to the case. Is your case a case of where someone crossed the center line by 1 inch or something like that? Well, if that's the case, you'd better make sure that your data is accurate enough for you to be able to prove that the measurements you took place the other guy over the center line, let's say, by 1 inch. So the accuracy, just having a known error rate, is important. And the scanner, of course, has very low error rates. And those rates are also producible on a report. So they're known to the operators when they're finished. The other thing that it does that is very difficult to do, well, it's 3-dimensional, first of all, but it's going to capture areas, tops of buildings or the walls or the facades of buildings or other areas. And that tree you talked about that grew over time, you can take that tree literally in the 3D world and make it smaller or larger, or put a tree there that's smaller or larger, or maybe it has a different circumference. But there's just all sorts of possibilities with it. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think most of it, I never have any difficulty, convincing operators to, use a scale, especially if they got a scale bar, and what the philosophy is behind that, and how to prove that, right, so that it's accurate later, and you can prove your equipment is working properly. And it's really a basic step. It's just a matter of making sure and I think they're usually different folks. It's not the cop that is go do it now. They're usually more methodical than the normal street officer, so they're good about slowing down and getting that control measurement in there and doing that. So I think they understand it, and they realize that they're not just measuring the scene. We're talking about a lot of visuals, right? 360 photography, and a lot of things that we can revisualize later and show. I know, because me working these cases, witnesses aren't always the best option. Even witnesses are a struggle, depending on what they do for a living, and are they really watching, or they think they watched. And I've had many statements where I'm looking at people going, there's no way you saw all this. There's interpretation along the way somewhere, or the conversation of somebody else or hearing somebody else. So then we have that against us. But with 3D scanning, being technical, it doesn't have to interpret anything, right? We can show that. There is a way for this person, like you said before, when do they see that vehicle? Or when can a person see a shooting? Or when can a person see a car enter the roadway, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, you're right about that,
those witnesses out when we can,
yeah.
which I know is
Yeah.
good. Our witnesses
Yeah.
aren't always great. Sometimes they're really good, but a lot of times they're not.
Yeah, and for those of us, well, you know, whenever the subject of what witnesses see comes up, how many times have you been told, well, when the pedestrian was hit, they went as high in the sky as the telephone line? Well, yeah, maybe from their perspective, they went as high as the telephone line, but they didn't get thrown over the car as high as the telephone line. I dare say that's physically impossible. But you're right. Now, the other part about the 3D scanning data is that you can take what you just spoke about, where there might be some contradiction with what the physical evidence says and what a witness says, which happens all the time. You can place a witness view in the software, in the point cloud, and you can say this is what the witness could possibly see or not. So it's a good use to either discredit your witness or another witness, or to give your witness credibility. Just depend, the facts are the facts. So it's really, really great. Like I said, something may come up later that you didn't think about or didn't know about at the time you were there, but the data is there, so you have it, and then you can do virtually anything with it that you want, whatever your case needs.
Yeah, great point. To that, switch gears just a little bit off of scanners and talk a little bit about FARO Zone Advanced.
Mm-hmm.
And if you said PhotoModeler, you're using two forensic tools that you're comfortable with. And I've seen PhotoModeler a little bit, but what kind of advancements are you seeing that these softwares are helping out with, and how do they improve these reconstruction analysis for us as investigators?
That's not a loaded question. It's a multi-part question. But no, I think the first thing I want to say, it's really refreshing to see that the software that we're using out there is developed for what we do, and the developers are very open to recommendations and suggestions from their customers. And I can say especially that's the case with FARO Zone software. Feedback is important, and I've seen enough changes. I mean, just over the last couple of years with FARO Zone, I use the FARO Zone 3D Expert, which is the version of the software that has all the reconstruction and crime reconstruction tools in it. We've seen photo points, so creating point clouds and orthographic photos from drones. We've seen the event data recording tool added. The new one now is the mass zone tool, which it's basically a computer prediction simulation component of the software, which we used to have years ago after we purchased the rights for the software from Aris 360. Aris 360, Aris HD was originally a company, I think they were out of, I might have that wrong, but Vancouver area. So that's now, that software FARO purchased years ago and is now FARO Zone software. So FARO Zone software is a combination of what used to be CAD Zone, Crash Zone, Crime Zone. And the teams that worked for Aris 360. Yep, Fire Zone as well. Correct. Yeah, I knew I'd forget one of them. There were all types of zone. I think there's just regular zone.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, it's really, really great. It's been a game changer. I've seen in terms of point clouds. I'll tell you one of my favorite parts, and the reason I'm really excited about PhotoModeler now is that you can take a 3D point cloud and bring that into the software and superimpose images over it. And so you can then take photographs, measurements from the photographs that align with 3D data. Really an amazing change. And it had taken some time for them to really get there. But to their credit, it's an amazing tool, and I use it often. I just worked on another case, I won't disclose the case, but on where, can I determine the suspect height in a criminal case from video surveillance? And so I use video surveillance clips and then superimpose that over a 3D scan of the same area, and from that determine the suspect height in the case. So there are all sorts of applications that are just, we're just really, we're at the beginning of this, and I think I think we're going to see some really wonderful things happening down the road. Now, I think one of the questions you asked me before is, well, what would that be? And I have to honestly say, I don't know. Like, who would have thought? I mean, laser scanning didn't exist when I was a police officer. Well, it might have existed, but it wasn't readily available in the private safety or the public safety realm. FARO laser scans have only been used in the United States, introduced first in the United States courts back in 2013. So we're really in the infancy of this whole laser scanning thing. And so where do we go from here? I think now the focus is on speed, more data, less time, more accurate, and really making like turnkey solutions, creating turnkey solutions that allow someone who doesn't have a lot of training and time to pick up a scanning device, go out, scan, come back, process all that data and create a deliverable and have it ready for court as quickly as possible. That's where the industry is going.
Yeah, that's a great point, and you probably know I understand that as well as far as how officers deal with it, and it's that evolution, right? From before, we were supposed to be very meticulous about our job and get data and information, and then we were experts. So we not only had to collect it, but we had to justify it, explain it, be able to back it up scientifically and prove it up. So I think we're seeing the same kind of thing is how do we get those folks, and give them tools because they're becoming experts in that. They're being able to focus. And there's a lot of agencies going to civilian. I know crime scene. I've even, like in Arizona, had civilian crash investigators. It's the same thing. They're doing it all the time. They have a lot of knowledge. So you give them tools to advance that is a big plus. It's very advantageous.
Yeah, I want to touch on real quick. You mentioned something about, back when you were doing this, I know you still do it, but as an officer, what I'm seeing, not a lot of, but what I'm seeing happening, and I know that it's happened in the area where I live, are these regional reconstruction teams. Part of what we see, and I'm sure you've experienced it as well, is that there are a lot of smaller agencies in our country who don't have the resources, number one, don't have the resources or the people, or even the number, at the end of the day, the number of collisions to investigate that can justify the cost of this sort of equipment. And the other part of that is the officers who have received training either in advanced investigation or reconstruction don't get enough time working on those cases to be comfortable when they do get the big one. So what I'm seeing, and I recommend, to people who are listening to this and we're thinking about, well, hey, we only have a 1 or 2 man reconstruction team, and we only do maybe 4 or 5 fatals a year. The regional concept works out really well. Get your chiefs together, or get your county together, or get your prosecutor's office together and say, all right, let's create a team of reconstructionists. And by the way, they don't need to all be reconstructionists. When we started a regional team in New Hampshire, the Belknap County regional team, we had a few reconstructionists, and then we had photographers. We had evidence technicians who collected our evidence. We had a private mechanic that we brought on board to do all of our vehicle inspections. So there are ways, you got to think outside the box. There are ways of really doing a great job in a professional, top-notch job, even if you don't have all the resources yourself, if you're not that one expert of everything. Because, Ryan, I'm here to tell you, and I know you understand this, we can't be an expert at everything. And today with information overflow, and I mean, there's a lot of information overflow. What software do I really want to be good at? Well, I might be able to be good at FARO Zone, might be able to be good at PhotoModeler, but then, after that, I mean, I have to at some point say enough is enough and just stick with what I'm working with, right? So that's a struggle for me. I want to do all these other really cool things, but just it's not possible because of the lack of time.
Yeah, it's a great point. But I agree with you on the software, and it's definitely helping. And the other side of that is, we have a different group of folks being officers, so they're more comfortable with computers, softwares, and everything. So that's going to be exponential. Meaning, like, we may be able to see them jump into that, be very comfortable with that. I think, the last couple of classes I've done, they're all, 20 or early 30-year-olds that are comfortable with that. And like you said, with the 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐭 thing, they're sponges. They're like, what can I do with it? And boy, they can call them button pushers, but they can, hit buttons all day long and go. And I'm like going, slow down. You're confusing everything. Let it process. And with 3D scanning, if you don't let it process and you start doing other things, you're just going to lock up a computer because it's doing multiple things, and that impatience as being a police officer kind of kicks in.
Yeah, one thing is for sure, right? The file sizes are large, and you always want it to move faster. But the more scans, the more data, the larger the file, the slower the process occurs. But I think about all the time that I spent at a desk at a drafting board, drafting out a diagram. I look back at that and say, the time I'm spending on these now is like just a fraction of that time, and I'm getting a better product for it.
That's amazing, that change in evolution, and less buttons to push and easier to do. And yeah, it's crazy. And then now we got AI introduced into that.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's just total. And what I thought about the other day was, just an AI bot to help you with your, officers with their scanners, especially as they get comfortable with them.
Mm-hmm.
Just type in a question, how do I, do a secondary scan and stuff like that. So, I'm gonna change gears. We're at 50 minutes, but just to kind of get to the next section, we did spend a lot of time on the software and stuff. I want to go into a courtroom process a little bit here for a while. So it's a big challenge in forensics, right, to transfer these complex concept thoughts and everything into something that a jury and attorneys can understand. As experts, that's our job. Right, we have to understand it and back it up, but then we also have to explain it to 12 individuals that have a totally different background. Each of them have a different background understanding. So in your career, how do the 3D visualizations with scanning and the stuff we have, how has it improved, or what will it do in the courtroom presentations in the near future?
Well, let me start by saying my advice to anyone who hasn't spent any time in the courtroom, from someone who has. I love court, by the way. Keep it simple, stupid. I mean, if you try to make this as complicated as it actually can be at times, the more difficult it's going to be for your jury to understand what in the world you're talking about. I know I'm preaching to the choir in that in a lot of ways, but I mean, when you are starting to break down the math or starting to break down what's laser scanning and all that stuff, you're going to lose jurors, or you may lose a judge if it's a trial de novo. But I mean, just be careful with that. That's my advice there. Now, my experience has been, I've testified using laser scanning data only twice. But my first time was, in retrospect, I wished that I had attempted to get virtual reality introduced into that trial, because the opposing attorney was completely ignorant about what laser scanning technology was. I was never deposed. It's a really unique case, but I was never deposed. I wasn't asked about laser scanning technology. So I walked into the courtroom with my blown up 3 feet high by 6 feet wide orthographic photo created from a 3D point cloud with all of my dimensions and my markers and my title block and all that stuff on it. And I also had my computer on the stand with me in the event that I needed to go into the 3D data. There was a quick little argument about, not an argument, but there was a question right at the beginning, like, Mr. Boynton, how many times have you been to this scene, to the scene of this collision? So I answered the question, and I really wasn't deliberately trying to set him up. I just came out of my mouth. I said, well, it just depends. And he goes, and then he sort of said, well, how difficult is the question? I said, well, it could be difficult because I'm using, 3D technology and virtual reality. I could be, and he throws his arms up and he kind of steps back and, virtual, what's this virtual? What's that? He goes, what's that word again? Now, by this time, the jury, literally the people in the front row of the jury box, were leaning forward like, okay, I want to see where this is going to go. And I said, well, I've been there twice physically, but I've been there, countless times in a virtual space. And he asked me again, well, what are you talking about? And I said, well, the diagram that you're looking at was created from a 3-dimensional cluster of points called a point cloud. And I went into it and I said, so I can literally walk through the scene or move through my scene with my mouse, or if I want to put virtual reality glasses on, I can walk through it that way too. But I can look at things in that scene from any angle, from any perspective. I can take measurements in that space. And the jury was blown away by it. That was my impression of it. It was also my impression because we won the case. But I think that it's a really good time for us to juries are, thank God, a little bit younger now than well, they can be younger. But when you got to know your jury too, right? Your jury pool is a bunch of older folks who are not as technologically advanced as maybe you are. Then that's something you need to consider. And when you're doing those trial preparations with your client or with your prosecutor, you need to educate them on what types of questions to ask and make sure that they understand it, because they can't get a jury to understand it if they don't understand it. And it's not a good thing to try to tackle that subject when you first get on the stand. And I know that's a long answer. My experience has been a positive one in both cases. And in both cases, I was not challenged really in any significant way. I think you're starting to see, I know that FARO Technologies we've had our FARO Zone, we've had our laser scanner challenged a few times, maybe 4 or 5 times under Daubert, and that the outcome has been positive for FARO, that the information, the data was not suppressed from the courtroom. So we've won all of those Daubert challenges. So it's been tried and tested. So I imagine that at some point the Daubert challenges are going to start falling off, because now, just like it used to be when horizontal gaze nystagmus was first introduced, or the intoxilizer, those were all tested at the very beginning, and now it's stipulated that it's good science. And here, laser scanning is good science, and it's been stipulated by the court. So I think we're in great shape there. Question is, how much can you get into the courtroom, and how comfortable are you with getting that in the courtroom? What you don't want to do is, bite off more than you can chew and bring stuff in there and get embarrassed because you're struggling with finding a measurement in that 3D space. Be prepared.
Yeah, good point. And I see that, but I can also see, and I've lived that. It's always been, 10 years ago, I was asking what this would do in the courtroom, right? And how do we do it? Baby steps. And it's very, and at our end as experts, it's frustrating to know that we could put more in the courtroom, but then they don't have the technology, they don't have the headsets, so there's all kinds of stuff keeping us from doing that. But, what we're also just talking about is exceptional cases, right? We don't need just a fender bender with somebody's neck pain. These are you're talking shootings, deaths, multiple deaths, whatever is we're trying to explain. So they're hiring cases that are dynamic and probably have a lot of pieces to address. And I think we'll grow there, like you're saying, is what can we give them so they can understand the story and make the right decision at the end. Is what we're trying to give them that evidence for, right? So just one last on this, as far as software and FARO Zone, PhotoModeler. If an agency is going into scanning or they're in scanning, what do you recommend software-wise for them to get started?
It depends. Well, it depends on your scanner for sure. I mean, most scanner manufacturers have their own software that they would sell as a package with the scanner itself. I think that I guess I can speak for all manufacturers and say that it makes sense that if you're using a scanner of a particular brand, that you're also using the brand of the software that's sold with it, because it does make that way you're not going to have any conflicts in terms of do they interact with each other well or not. I know that in the FARO products we sell our laser scanners with FARO Scene software, which is the software that's used to process the data and register or align the scans. I also know there's software, Autodesk Recap sells software that allows you, there's Recap and Recap Photo or Photo Pro, which allow you to process and register scans, and also to create point clouds. And FARO Zone, actually the FARO Zone product just, I believe, not just, but I think it's coming out in this quarter, if it hasn't been announced already, will now offer the features to process and register scans in the software and edit those point clouds in the FARO Zone software. And then you can jump right over to your crash reconstruction tools, diagramming and animation in the same product, because that will no longer require a separate scene software license. then the price of the FARO Zone product with those additional features would be obviously higher. But we're trying to make it easier for everyone to have everything in one place so that you don't have to be jumping all over the place trying to find different things. There are a lot of, and I know I don't want to keep you much longer, Ryan, because I know we're running out of time. There are other things that, when you do this long enough, there are things that you just can't find in the software that you're using and that you have to look elsewhere. And a prime example of that for me, because I do a lot of higher end crashes, like right now I'm doing a motorcycle versus a car crash. And the question is, how far over the center line was the operator of whatever vehicle? And in those cases, you may need high-end manufacturer specifications, scaled correctly models for those analyses. And there are times when the software that we use, whether it's, 𝐏𝐼K's software or FARO's software, those models aren't available, or some models are available, but maybe the resolution isn't high enough for really us to be able to get what we want. And in those cases, you might have to go out and purchase them. I purchase my models from TurboSquid, and I purchase my models from 3D Warehouse and other places. A great feature with the FARO Zone software is that we partnered with SketchUp, which is owned by, I can't remember right now, it's either Google but SketchUp is owned by Trimble. And those models, any model that's created by a third party or a private person, puts those up on the SketchUp site, and they're made available to our users in the software for free. And more often than not, I can find a model that I need there. So that's my first go-to spot if I can't find it in our own software. So there's just all sorts of things to think about. The other big thing right now is human motion and animation, and how good does that have to be? There's software out there that I use for that. Anyway, there's just different stuff. Primarily, I'm right now working with that using Unity, Rail Engine.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a whole other world when you start visualizing people being thrown and hit.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
that's a lot of time on that. A lot of time.
Very detailed in it. Very detailed.
Yeah.
Especially to get it realistic and accurate. So, So Russ, this has really been an eye-opening discussion. Your expertise is obviously dynamic and helpful to the industry. Your experience as a 3D reconstructionist in the courtroom and as well as investigations invaluable. Appreciate that. And I know you give back to the forensic community quite a bit. Thank you for all that. Before we wrap up, for the listeners and those involved here, kind of tell them about your work and the training programs you do, because you do on focal points forensics, for example. So just kind of give us a snapshot of your businesses and what you offer to the public.
Yeah, I work for police agencies for free as a private consultant, and our customers know, FARO customers know, that if they need help, they call and I'm there when I'm not in the classroom. So yeah, I'm as a former police officer, always willing and able, or when I'm able to get out there and do my part to help in the service of our citizens. My business is focal point forensics, as you said. It's primarily crash reconstruction, although and FARO fortunately allows me to work on that business on the side. Because of my full-time job with FARO and then my part-time job with Focal Point, my caseload is, I can only handle so much. And unfortunate, my son works for me on a part-time basis. He's a certified scanner operator, so I use his time to help me out. And primarily crash reconstruction services. I've been known to do some suspect height stuff and some civil personal injury cases not involving cars, because my background is aside from reconstruction, 3D documentation and graphics. So thank you for having me too, Ryan. I appreciate the invitation, and this has been really cool.
Oh yeah, not a problem. We'll get those any kind of way to contact Russ. We'll put on the visuals, but his site is at www.focal point forensics, all one together, if you want to check it out. And Russ, I thank you for sharing your insights today. And to our listeners, if you found the episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, stay curious in your forensics investigation. So Russ, hang tight a little bit. I'm going to close this out, and then we can chat for a little bit.
You got it.
All right, that wraps up another Inside of Virtual Reality Reconstructionist. Thank you, Russ Boynton, for joining us today and sharing your invaluable insights to the world of advancing crash scene documentation and laser scanning. Thank you to the listeners for tuning in. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast platform for more episodes exploring the fascinating world of virtual and augmented reality, as well as forensic investigation. Until next time, this is Roger Ryan signing off from the Virtual Reality Reconstructionist. Stay safe and stay curious.